Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to this webinar on interview hints and tips. So my name's Charlotte, I'm from Leicestershire Cares. We're a small local charity which works with schools and businesses to help promote careers advice to students just like you who are sort of finishing school and thinking about what they're going to do next. I'm really delighted to be joined today by Nick from Joules and Kate from Access Generation. They're going to share some of their hints and tips on what to do to prepare for a job interview and also what to do during a job interview. So two really important things: how to make a good impression for a potential employer. We're recording the session so that other students who can't join it live can watch it later on. If you have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. It should flash up if you move your mouse down at the bottom of the screen. And we can answer those as we go through, but we'll also have a Q&A session at the end. So if you think of a question, do put it straight in the box. But also if at the end you think actually it would be good to know about this from Nick or this from Kate, then please do put that in the Q&A as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nick. He's going to talk about how to prepare for a job interview.
Hi guys, it's good to see that so many of you have tuned in. So as Charlotte explained, I'm going to run through sort of interview prep, or what I would recommend that you take a look at and take into consideration leading up to the interview day, and also how you might tackle those pre-interview nerves or pre-interview questions that you might have. So what I'm going to do is quickly just share my screen with you as I've put together a small sort of presentation for you to have a look at. So I currently sit within the Joules internal recruitment team, so I'm one of their talent acquisition partners. So in terms of your interview, so in terms of preparing for your interview, for me, there's a few key points that I would say are your base essentials to have a look at. To one, give the right impression when you first turn up for your interview, and to let them know that you are genuinely interested in the role that you're applying for and are excited about the company that you're looking to work for. So for me, it's understanding the company you're applying for. So what is their UPS? It's something that I get asked quite a lot in interviews, and something I ask in interviews, which is unique selling points of the company. So those could be, for example, are they a family-run independent business that has been founded from a garden shed and turned into a massive corporation? Could it be that they are a completely eco-friendly company that looks at bettering their carbon footprint? Each company has a unique selling point that makes them different from their competitors, as well as sets them above what they would consider the rest of the market. So it's really good to have a look at their history and their story. So where did they start? How did they become what they are today? And what steps have they taken to get there? Do the company values match yours? So most companies will have a set of values that they look to work towards and look to abide by as a rule of thumb. It's really important, in my opinion, that those match your values. So if you are someone who is looking to be very conscious of the climate and the ecosystem and your carbon footprint, then if that's one of the things that the company is very strong on, then they're probably a good match for you. If, for example, you're that mindset, but then you're looking to interview for, I don't know, Shell or a massive company that's into fossil fuels, it might not be the best match. So I think it's really important for you to have a look at what your values are and how they align with the company you're interviewing for, because it's also a good talking point. Another thing I would recommend you have a look at is the reviews for the company you're applying for. So those can be just as helpful as everything else I've mentioned, if not more helpful, because those reviews are coming from those people who have either interviewed, have worked, or have previously, or are currently working, for the company that you're looking to join. And a lot of the times the reviews are anonymous, so people can speak freely and openly, and so you'd probably get a very good and honest understanding of what the company is like to work for. In regards to who you're interviewing with, I think it's really important to understand who those people are. If you get an interview confirmation and people haven't told you the names and the job titles of those you're interviewing with, I would recommend you ask. So what do they do within the company is really important to understand. Are you interviewing with HR, or are you interviewing with the person who would essentially be your manager? What is their background? So is this company the first company they've worked for? Have they come from other companies that are similar, or perhaps changed their background drastically? Because that can bring up some good talking points of you being able to ask questions back to them, because interviews are a two-way process. They are not just interviewing you, you are also there to interview the company as far as most talent acquisition teams are concerned, because it is important that you are comfortable with them being the right match for you as well. So have a look at how long they've been with the company. If they've been there a long time, it might be worth asking them what's made them stay. Why do they love it so much? Especially in modern times, people tend to move companies fairly often, perhaps every couple of years. So when you see people who have been with a company for 5, 10, 15 years, it's worth wondering what makes them stay with that company when there are competitors in the market that they could be interested in. It's something that I think sparks very good conversation, and they tend to be very receptive to those sort of questions. And having a look to see whether they progressed or moved within the company. So this can give you an idea of what progression looks like for a company. So did someone start as, I will go with HR because that's the function I'm in. Will someone start as a HR admin? Have they now been there 15 years and they're now a HR manager or a HR business partner? It gives you a good idea of whether or not the company looks to promote within, which is something you may be interested in as your career progresses. This slide is talking about the resources you can use for preparation. So having a look at that company information can be found as obvious as it seems, their company website. You'll be surprised the amount of times in interviews when we have asked, or I've asked, what did you think of our company website? It's a lot of the time people haven't looked, or they perhaps haven't thought to look at the company website, and it can just let them know that you're doing your research. So have a look at the company website. What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? Did it give you the information you need? A lot of them will have links to their teams, so you can see the people you'll be interviewing for and some details about them. LinkedIn is a really good example. If you don't have a LinkedIn page, you can create one with pretty basic information. You don't have to share a lot on there, but it allows you to look up the people you're interviewing with and understand a bit more about them. And the company that they're looking for. So each company has a page on LinkedIn that typically shares a lot of information about what the company's been doing, what it's up to. Again, with Glassdoor, so there for the company reviews, I would recommend Glassdoor for reading those. It's a very good and reliable website that a lot of people turn to leave their feedback on companies. And it is broken down into pros, cons, and what they would suggest to management. So it really gives you a breakdown of what people think are good and what people think could be improved. Companies' social media pages. Now, this can be hit and miss. Some companies are very active on social media. It really depends on the industry you're going into. But their social media pages can tell you a lot about what they're doing internally in terms of team building exercises, what they could be doing in terms of sort of in company engagement. So I don't know, do a lot of PR companies, for example, do a lot of social events for their teams because it's a very socially active and very cultural expectation of that kind of environment. So you have a lot of, I don't know, publication launches, you might have a lot of parties that people would like to go to. And if that's the sort of thing you're looking for, then their social media page may give that away. And on the other hand, if you're looking for places that have a lot of engagement with the community, their social media pages will probably tell you that. So when you're looking in for information about the people who are interviewing you, you've got your company blogs and company publications, as well as industry magazines and industry publications can give you really good ideas about the company and the people you're interviewing with. If you're going to medical field, for example, which I was previously involved in, what are their publications like? What did they study? What have they done research in? It can really help to bring about that conversation and find topics to discuss when you might feel a bit uncomfortable or lost in an interview situation. You can always rely on those key points to perhaps start some conversation and also link your answers to. Google, I know that seems very vague, but you can find a lot out on Google, putting their name in and the current company they're working with. You'll find all sorts that people have been involved in, whether that be, for example, if Leicestershire Care put that we had been involved in this presentation, then I would come up on Google, for example, with that. And it shows what the company's been involved in, what charities they might be assigned to, and really gives you a good idea of what the company's all about. And again, company social media can give you links to the people that you are interviewing with. So in terms of how you should prepare yourself for questions, so for me, I would advise that you prepare by practicing standard interview questions beforehand. So things such as, what do you like about the company you're applying for? What makes you want to work for X company? What do you like most about the role you're applying for? I think that can sometimes make people very stuck in their answer. They either don't expect it or they're not quite sure what they like about it. And if it's a case of you don't know enough about the role, flip the question and say, oh, well, I was quite interested by this aspect. Could you tell me more about it? It gives them it really gives them the feel that you are invested in what you're looking to do, and that if you don't understand something, you're happy to ask the question. A lot of interview questions will be around example-based questioning. So, for example, let's say the job is for a software developer, and it might say, give me an example of code that you've had to make more simple, or how you may have had to get around a problem with, let's say you're a designer and there's a problem with a deadline on a print manufacturing. How did you get around that problem? How did you manage that obstacle? And that can usually be linked to the requirements of the job. So I would have a look at what questions you may think they would come up with by looking at the job description, but also get friends and family to write some questions down. I do that fairly often with my family. When I'm interviewing, I will ask them to prepare some questions that they think may be asked based off the job spec, or if you know someone who is involved in that industry, get them to write some questions down, and then I will practice my answers for those. You might not get the exact questions, but it will help allow you to prepare that mind thought of how you're going to answer those questions. So there are some question answering techniques that I would recommend. So STAR is a big one, which I'll go through in a bit more detail. Relatability. So for me, it is making sure that your answer is related to the question they're asking you, or it relates to the situation that you find yourself in. So if someone is asking how you've managed confrontation, it doesn't necessarily have to be in a workplace. If you're fresh out of college, you're not going to have that workplace experience. So maybe describe how you helped solve conflict with yourself and another peer when you were at college. You could talk about how you've sort of resolved conflict in any situation outside of your home. I would avoid too much home talk, just because they might not be able to relate to it. So I think if you're in a situation, it can be quite relatable. So I don't know, you've had a disagreement in a project at college is a really good way of explaining conflict, or how you've got around a task that's been a bit difficult. And for me, turning what they would consider weak points into learning points and points of strength. So a lot of the time, a question that would be commonly asked is, what would you say your strengths and what would you say your weaknesses are? Now, it's a bit of a horrible question to be asked, and it's difficult to answer, because what you don't want to do is potentially put them off with the answers that you give for your weak points. But I always flip that question in my mind and think, okay, what are my areas for improvement rather than weak points? So have a look at how you've perhaps, if time management, if you know you tend to run a bit late, think about how you have gone to improve that. So my time management skills may not be the best, but instead what I've done is I make sure that I set up reminders in my phone, I put reminders in my calendars. So it gives them the feeling that you are doing something to solve that issue. So you understand what the problem is, and you're implementing some tasks and steps that you can put in place to try and overcome those boundaries. And then those weaknesses kind of get turned into learning points or points of improvement. So I mentioned the STAR technique. This is a very common technique for answering interview questions that is very effective. So I would look at practicing this beforehand, and I'm sure that, that this is something that Kate will probably talk through or has come across before. So you've got situation, task, action, and result. So really make sure that you think about what they're asking you. So these practice questions you're going to go through. Make sure you describe that event or situation. Explain the task you were given to complete and use details. So dates, times, if you can. If it's something that you can't remember the exact date and time, it's not a problem. Action, so what actions did you take to complete that task? You specifically. I would make sure that you talk less about we as a group for majority of the interview. I would make sure that if they're asking you what you've done, you can talk about being in a group, but talk specifically about what you did in that group yourself. So if it was a task that you had to overcome and you found it difficult, what did you personally do to fix that? And the same with results. So have a look at what the results of your efforts were. Was it a positive result? Great if it was. If it was a negative result, what did you learn from it? What would you do differently next time? Giving names, dates, and times makes it a lot more relatable and gives people the impression that it was an event that actually happened. So it's something that we should definitely have a look at doing. I've just seen a question come through regarding remote interviews. So I have had a remote interview. The role that I'm currently working in was a remote interview. All this can be very, very relevant to remote interviews. So what I didn't want to do is just do face-to-face. So all of these techniques can be done ahead of, and in remote interviews, you've got the benefit of being able to have a list of questions in front of you if you wanted to, that can almost prompt you and give you some prompts as to what you need to say. So you could put just some simple bullet points down to remind yourself of what the answers you were going to talk about. So remote interviewing can actually be very beneficial in that way. It's a bit more difficult to get a good gauge for the company that you're looking to join, but it's definitely, it gives advantage to you guys in terms of being able to take that bit extra time to have some prompts around for your questioning. So in terms of my last bit of, I suppose my last tip or trick for interview prep is, this is as relevant for face-to-face as it is remote. So get a good night's sleep beforehand. It's going to be tough. You're going to be nervous, but try and get enough rest. Make sure you eat something prior to your interview. If you're anything like me, eating a meal before an interview is the last thing you want to do, but it's the best thing that you could do. When you fuel your body, you're more likely to have an active mind, and your mind is more likely to be on top of where you need it to be and responsive. So get everything you need ready the evening before. So if you've got a face-to-face interview, plan your journey, make sure your clothes are laid out, they're all ready, so you're not rushing around in the morning and you don't get panicked if you can't find something. If you're looking to do a remote interview, make sure your desk is all set up and ready to go, so you're not worrying about wires and plugs and all your internet beforehand. So make sure you really give yourself time to prepare. If you're turning up in person, get there early. I wouldn't say too early, 10 to 15 minutes at most. If you're any earlier than that, I would perhaps wait outside, grab a coffee, sit in your car if you drive, and then make sure that you're in reception ready to interview 10 to 15 minutes beforehand. And also dress appropriately. So when I say appropriately, that doesn't necessarily mean suit and tie or a fancy dress for every interview. That's absolutely not the case. There are some jobs where that is not required and it's not expected at interview. If you're unsure of how you should dress for an interview, just ask. I know personally, I've worked in companies where it was totally okay for someone to turn up in hoodies and a pair of jeans for an interview. But if you're ever stuck, I would always go for a smart casual approach, so office wear, which I'm sure you'll be doing in sixth form and college anyway, or just ask the person who invited you to interview what the appropriate dress code is for the office. Lastly, I think a checklist of stuff that I tend to bring to interview, and I would recommend anyone does, is a bottle of water. You're not guaranteed to be offered a drink wherever you go, and the last thing you want is a very dry mouth and unable to talk properly during your interview. A notebook and pen. Even if you have to, just ask beforehand if you're okay to take notes. I would recommend that, because it means you can write down the important parts to you. You can also note down anything that you would like to ask questions on. And I'd bring a copy of your most up-to-date CV and any supporting documents. So be that your certificates from college, because they may ask you on the spot for those, and it makes you seem a lot more prepared. Lastly, if you have any letters of recommendation, or you have any written references, which I appreciate a lot of you may not do, having not had any previous work experience maybe, bring those with you, or it could be a letter of recommendation from your college tutor on how you've done on your course. But it's a good, useful tool to have, so that if they do ask, do you have anything else you'd like to share? It's always good to put those across the table. And I think lastly, before I wrap up, it's about you feeling that you've done your best. So as long as you feel like you have put in the effort, you've put in the time, and you've done your best, then you can be proud of your efforts regardless of the outcome. And something that I say fairly regularly to people who I know, and also those who interview with me, is rejection from a role isn't always a bad thing. There are times when companies have a different path in mind for you. So it could be the fact that they would like to see you in a different role or a different position. And on the occasion that happens, it can be a really beneficial move. But also, it's sometimes life's way of pushing you in the direction you're meant to be going in. So just because you may get setbacks doesn't necessarily mean that you aren't going to end up where you want to go. I think with perseverance and ensuring that you really put your best foot forward, you're very likely to end up where you need to go. Just might take a bit longer to get there, but you'll get there. So that's sort of what I've got in terms of interview prep. I know there's a few more questions, so I'm sure we'll go through those, but I'll let Charlotte guide on when.
Thanks, Nick. That was fantastic. I think I learned a few tips from that, and I've been to quite a lot of job interviews. So thank you very much. That was brilliant and really thorough. Yeah, so what I suggest is if we hand over to Kate to go through what to do during an interview, because she might pick up on a couple of those questions anyway, and then we can sort of share some of the questions and answers at the end of the session. Does that sound okay to you both?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Nick. If you stop sharing your screen, and then we can
yes,
hand over to Kate as well. Fantastic.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Kate. I'm currently a marketing research and peer assistant at Access Generation. I'm also a student. I'm studying a master's in international business. So yeah, I'll just go over what to do during an interview. So I think, as someone said in the question section, obviously because stuff is remote at the moment, there's remote interviews and face-to-face interviews. I've had a lot of kind of job interviews recently, and generally for graduate schemes and apprenticeships, I've seen businesses really like to use video interviews, where you don't have an interview on the other end of the screen. It's quite a weird experience. I know my first one, I definitely was a bit put off by the idea, as obviously you are talking to yourself. So yeah, you get given, I'll just kind of go over what that entails. So you get given a question on the screen, and they'll normally give you about 30 seconds to prep an answer. And then you've got a certain amount of time to record your answer. You might get several attempts to record your answer. As I think they're aware, obviously, it's a nerve-wracking experience, but other times you might just get one attempt. I think I first struggled with this, as obviously not having someone on the other end, it's quite hard to still come across as approachable and friendly. So I think the advice I'd give is, even if you don't have someone on the other end of the screen and it is a video interview, make sure you maintain eye contact. something I also found really useful is, even though there isn't anyone there, it's always really good to introduce yourself. So say, hi, I'm Kate, and then smile as well. It's important to smile, even if there isn't anyone there. So yeah, I'd say for video interviews, that's kind of the difference. Although you might have someone there, it depends what company it is. Some companies, obviously, you do have video interviews where there's an interviewer, but others you don't. But I think it's really important to still maintain the same technique, kind of as some of the techniques that obviously Nick discussed. But yeah, so I'll focus firstly on face-to-face interviews. I think it's really useful to take in notes with you. So as Nick discussed, obviously, you should prepare beforehand. You might have just a couple of notes to kind of remind you during the interview. You might get really nervous. I'm definitely someone that struggles with nerves, so I think it's useful to have some notes there just to prompt you in case your mind goes blank, because I know that's quite common. Another thing is also obviously being polite. You need to greet the interviewer by shaking their hand, and they should offer you a seat, which obviously you wait until you're invited to do so. Also, body language is something that's really important. Obviously, the interviewer doesn't have that much time with you. They might have an hour at most, so they will really be looking at the kind of minor details. So body language is something that you might not notice, but you need to try and make a conscious effort to give off kind of a confident persona, I guess. So you need to make sure you're not fidgeting, try not to cross your arms, as it may not give the interviewer kind of the best impression of you. So instead, try and sit up straight and smile. And obviously, as I said kind of previously about the video interviews, maintaining eye contact, but maybe not too much eye contact, as you don't want to make the interview uncomfortable. So you just need to try and get the right balance. Also, if you don't hear a question, instead of trying to guess what the interviewer's asked, just ask them to repeat the question. They're aware that nerves might mean that you miss the question. Obviously, you're in your head, you're thinking about what you're going to answer. So you might just for some reason not hear the question, and they'll be more than happy to repeat it. They won't think poorly of you because you missed the question. Or if you don't understand the question, I think it's fine to ask for clarity. I don't think they'd have a problem with kind of making the question clearer, as they're not there to scare you off, they're just there to help you and learn more about you. Yeah, so I think as well, another thing that you might find quite hard when you're in an interview is obviously thinking about your answer. They might throw you off with a question that you weren't expecting, but it's important to take the time to consider your answer. So don't just start speaking without actually knowing where you're going with the answer. It's much better just to take your time. They're expecting you to take their time. They're not expecting you to straight away be able to come up with, an answer. And I think another thing which I'm guilty of doing, I'm probably doing now, is feeling the temptation to speak too quickly. When you're nervous, obviously that's something that I think most people do. So it's really important to try and kind of keep control of the nerves and to not get your answer out as quickly as possible. Instead, try and slow down, take some deep breaths and just give your answer in a controlled manner. Another thing that I think Nick mentioned is about the question to do with strengths and weaknesses. I think the weakness is something that employers do like to do to throw you off. I think what they're looking for that is to make sure that you're genuine. So, and not just telling them what they want to hear. So if you hear, they ask you a question about what's your weakness, you might have a temptation just to say, oh, I don't really have any. Obviously, everyone's human, everyone has weaknesses. So I think it's important to be honest. There's obviously a fine line, as Nick mentioned. You don't want to say anything that's too bad. For example, if you're applying for a waitressing role and you said, my weakness is that I can't balance plates, obviously that's not great. So you need to kind of focus on something that isn't really, really important for the role, maybe something slightly more minor. So a good one could be that my weakness is that I'm a perfectionist. I maybe spend too long on minor details. That's something that I wouldn't say reflects too badly on you, but it also does show that you're being genuine and honest. Yeah, and another thing, it probably sounds quite obvious, but you need to obviously try and come across as friendly and a pleasure to work with. I think in interviews it's normally quite common just to kind of tense up and almost come across as a bit of a robot. So maybe a bit flat and neutral, maybe. So I think it's really important to remember that you need to make these people want to work with you. So there's no harm in beforehand having a kind of casual chat with them. Obviously keep it obviously appropriate, just hi, how are you? And it's also fine to, you know, have a bit of kind of casual banter with the interviewer, but still keeping it professional. So I think there's a fine line between keeping it professional, but also making it very clear that you are a friendly person and letting your personality come through. Also at the end of the interview, you're normally invited to ask questions. You might have already prepped questions beforehand that you want to ask. In that case, obviously they'll be more than happy to answer those questions. But if you can't think of any questions, I think it's sometimes good to show an interest in the interviewer or the interviewees, depending on how many there are, or interviewers, by asking them a question about themselves, like what they like about the company. It's kind of a good way of turning it round and showing an interest in them, which they should like. And then at the end, obviously at the end of the interview, it's really important to thank the interviewer, just out of kind of politeness. So yeah, I'd say they're the main points that I can think of during an interview.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Kate. That was really, really useful and really insightful. Lots of really good tips there from both of our speakers, so I hope you've all found that useful. We've got a couple of questions, so I don't know, Kate and Nick, which of these you'd like to take. Kate, maybe because this is about kind of what you do during an interview, but someone's asked, you have an option to show your face in remote interviews, so to turn on your video. Some people might not want to show their faces, but is it better, and does it show that you're more prepared if you show your face?
Yeah, I think definitely show your face. Obviously, it's easier for them to kind of relate to you and kind of, I guess, know more about you as a person. Obviously, as I said, they do look at your body language. They want to see if you're smiling, if you're making eye contact, and they're not able to do those things if you keep your camera off. So I think it's really, really important to keep your camera on. You might not be comfortable with it, but interviews aren't really a comfortable situation. I don't think they ever will be a comfortable situation. However many you do, even if you're 50, 60, whatever, I think they're always going to be a nerve-wracking situation. And unfortunately, I think it's something you do just need to kind of get used to. So yeah, I'd say keep your camera on.
Great, thank you. Nick, have you got anything that you want to add to that?
No, just I would agree with Kate. I think the impression that gives is very strong. I think if you are to say, actually, I don't want to turn my camera on, it can make them question your cultural fit in the company. If that makes sense. So cultural fit in these times is just as important as skill-based fit and experience fit. So if they think that you may be a bit shy or a bit worried about people seeing you or hearing you, it may make them hesitate putting you into a team environment, which could very realistically sort of be a make or break in that situation. So I'd turn it on. By all means, crack a joke bad video interviews can be in terms of it's all a bit awkward. Most of us have that joke when we come onto video interviews because it's an awkward situation, and I think it's a lot more difficult to express yourself via video. So just do your best with it and definitely keep it on.
Great, fantastic. Yeah, and it's worth thinking, if you went to a face-to-face interview, obviously you would be presenting yourself physically to an employer. You don't sit there with a cardboard cut out in front of you, not stopping them from seeing you. So yeah, they definitely want to see you. It's a bit weird seeing yourself. I still find this very weird myself. I don't know about you, Sue, but seeing yourself talking while you're talking is a weird experience. So maybe a bit of practice, even, you know, if you can get a friend's, you know, chat on Zoom or whatever the platform might be that someone invites you to do a remote interview on. Absolutely. Great. And then Nick, maybe if you want to take this one initially, what answer could you give if an interviewer asks, tell me about yourself?
So this one has a few approaches, in my opinion. I never think it's a bad thing to tell them a bit about your personal hobbies, interests, experiences. I think they don't just want to understand you as a professional. I think they also want to understand you as a person. So talk to them. I would begin by sort of explaining a bit about your general hobbies. So I don't know, do you have a dog that you like to go on hikes with? Everyone loves dogs, most people, maybe not everyone, but it's a conversation starter. You never know, the person who you're interviewing may also go hiking with their dog, and it breaks down that initial awkward barrier between yourself and the interview, and it's typically the first question they will ask you. And it's not a bad time to tell them about what you enjoy in terms of what you've achieved. So if you've done well at college or your dissertation was amazing when you finished uni, talk them through what you did and why you're interested in it, and tell them a bit about something linked to the job. So let's say you're going for a creative role. Talk to them through a hobby that is creative and brings out that side of you, because then you are still linking it to the job, but what you're not doing is just going off on a tangent for half an hour about, I don't know, how your favorite hobby is to bake cupcakes at the weekend. It's not, keep it as relevant as possible, but also let them realize that you're a human and you're not just a professional robot that's looking to interview for a role, because that's not what they're looking for.
Great, thanks, Nick. Kate, have you got anything that you'd share on that?
I think Nick pretty much covered it. I think he answered it well. Yeah, I'd say exactly the same. Maybe if you're studying, you could tell them, if it was at degree level, obviously you could say, I've just finished, I'm an undergraduate seeking a role in blah, blah, blah. And then, yeah, talk about your interests, kind of make them clear, I guess, what you're like as a person, yeah, as opposed to just a professional. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Great, thank you both. And for those of you who are going to have a mock interview as part of our event next month, top tip, that is the first question. So think about what you would say if someone asks you, tell me a bit about yourself, and have a practice of that before your mock interview. Wonderful, great. So I don't know if any students have got any other questions, but thank you very much, Nick and Kate. That was really, really useful. We had one come up.
I think there might be one more about asking the interviewer a question.
Oh, sorry, yes. Didn't see that one because it was from the same person again. Okay, great. So yes, so is it good to ask the interviewer a question, and what kinds of questions are good? Kate, you spoke a little bit about this as well.
Yeah.
What kind of questions would you suggest are quite good to ask? Yeah.
Something that, yeah, I ask when I feel like they've covered everything, that I don't need to know kind of any of the basics about a job. I think it's always good to ask the person that's interviewing you, maybe their experience at the company, what they enjoy about the company. I think it's a good way of showing an interest in them. And obviously everyone loves it when someone's interested in them. That's just kind of human nature, I guess. So yeah, I think definitely asking an interviewer, yeah, a question about their experience at the company is a good idea. So yeah, I think that's it.
Great. And Nick, what are your top tips around asking interviewers questions?
I think, as I sort of outlined, I think interviews are a two-way process. And I think a lot of people forget that it is just as important for that company to be the right fit for you as it is for you to be the right fit for them. So ask questions around what the team's like, what is the culture like in the company, anything that's important to you. So, I mean, you could love what you do in a job, but if you're in a team that you don't enjoy, it's one of the main reasons people leave their current position, because of the team they're in. So understand what's the team dynamic like, how many are in your team, the more you ask about the role and the team, the more, one, you appear interested in what you're looking to interview for, but two, it gives you an informed decision to make that choice. If you are the successful candidate and they present an offer to you, it gives you all of the cards on the table that you can say, yes, I definitely want that job, that's the right company for me. Because if you're in a fortunate position where you've got multiple offers, it's those small details that will make you decide between one company and another. Apart from obviously the obvious of what the job is, the pay, everything like that. Cultural and the small details make a huge difference to roles. So I would definitely ask the interviewer about that, ask how they like to manage their people. So it's a question that I ask every manager I've ever interviewed with, is how do you like to manage people? For me, I personally don't like to be micromanaged. It's not something that I do well with in a role. So their answer to that can tell me whether or not I will be put in that situation of, am I allowed to be in my role and do what I need to do and run with it? Or will it be a case of I have to wait to be given everything step by step? So definitely quiz them as much as they're quizzing you, in my opinion. Obviously do it in a polite way and wait for your turn, but definitely ask them everything that you want to know about them and how they manage their team.
Yeah, fantastic. It is really important to ask questions. And again, when you have a mock interview with one of our business members, at the end, you'll have the opportunity to ask a question. So do think about a good question that you might ask your business volunteer. It's also really good when you go for a real job. It's a good opportunity to show off that you have done the research, like Nick kind of talked about in his presentation. So you can say, oh, I saw on your website that you've done this bit of work and I'm really interested in that. Can you tell me a bit more about it? And as Kate says, it gives them an opportunity to talk about themselves, which everyone really likes doing. So that's also a good kind of tip in terms of asking questions. Fantastic, great. Okay, so we've had a question about how long an interview usually takes. What would you guys say is sort of a typical interview length?
The go-to for, it depends on the stage, if I'm very honest. So, and it does depend on the industry and the role. However, I would say for entry-level roles that you guys will all be looking to apply for and get your foot into the door, you're probably looking at a 1 or 2 stage process. I would say that an average interview time is 45 minutes to an hour for first stage, maybe a bit longer for second. It depends. If you're in a technical role, there might be a technical test that takes X amount of time, but as a hands-on sort of, not hands-on, sorry, as a sort of sit-down face-to-face or virtual interview, we tend to book them in for 45 minutes to an hour because I think that gives everyone enough time to gauge what they need. But I wouldn't be alarmed if it runs over or under. It's not always a bad sign. It can also be that they've got everything they need in a shorter period of time, or they just need a bit more information from you, or they got carried away with idle conversation that always happens around interviews. Then that would be my take on it. Yeah,
great. And the final question we've got on here at the moment is a mock interview like a practice interview? So yes, the answer is yes. So it's a kind of trial run for you to find out what the experience is like being in an interview situation with a business member, asking and answering questions. So yeah, it's all practice for you so that you can learn what you're good at in an interview and where you might want to improve for the next time when you have a real job interview. Great, so I'll just wait in case we have any other questions pop up. But yeah, big thanks to Nick and Kate today. Some really fantastic advice for our students joining in and for those who get to listen to this later as well. So thank you very much for your time. I don't think we've got any more questions by the looks of it. So we'll finish there. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope that was useful.
Thanks for coming, guys.